Greetings once again, dear listeners, and thank you for joining us here at the Republic Broadcasting Network. I'm Bruce G. McCarthy, your host for the next 1 hour, and you are listening to Datum Line. In our last Datum Line broadcast, entitled Economic Myths and the Science of Deceit, Part 8, we concluded our review of the popular myth put forth by populists and other Federal Reserve critics that Congress was somehow authorized to print and create money out of nothing, pursuant to a constitutional mandate. As shown in that message and previous broadcast, no such power was granted to Congress or to anyone else by our constitutional forefathers. In fact, that power was specifically withheld from Congress at Article 1, Section 8, and expressly denied to the states at Article 1, Section 10. In the words of A. Barton Hepburn in his 660-page book, History of Coinage and Currency of the United States and the Perennial Contest for Sound Money, published in 1903, quote, the words, those words and emit bills, the words were stricken out by a vote of 4-1, and unquestionably the convention, that being at Philadelphia, 1787, intended to withhold from the federal government the power to create paper money with legal tender attributes. This, from a doctor of law, ex-comptroller of the currency, ex-superintendent of banking for the state of New York, and vice president of Chase National Bank. Now, a maxim of law is that the intent of the lawmaker is the law, to which Mr. Hepburn emphasized that it was unquestionably intended to withhold this power of money creation. In the words of George Bancroft, whose 10-volume history of the United States is still regarded as the most accurate chronicle of early American events, he said, quote, the refusal, not the ignorance or forgetful oversight, but the refusal of the convention, that being in Philadelphia, to confer on the legislature of the United States the power to emit bills of credit or irredeemable paper money in any form is so complete that according to all rules by which public documents are interpreted, it should not be treated as questionable. These words taken from his book, A Plea for the Constitution of the United States, at page 38, first published in 1886 and reprinted in 1982. So obvious was this congressional disability that no attempt was made by Congress to emit so-called paper money for over 70 years. And even then, it took a national emergency, called the Civil War, to open what became the most heated debate in Congress up to that time. Not only were the opponents of Lincoln greenbacks against them, but their advocates opposed them, except as a temporary expedient, so they said. Such is the peculiar background of United States notes that receive shameless praise from so many Federal Reserve critics today. In our next broadcast, we'll provide extracts from the congressional debate of 1861 to show that Congress was well aware that Lincoln greenbacks were issued in violation of their constitutional oath. Following our previous message on the widespread error propagated by populists and others about the non-existent constitutional power to create money, we return to the 18 presumptions of Mr. Thorne and Mr. Warner at point number 15 in their Truth in Money book. We'll finish points number 16 through 18 in today's message, which is entitled Economic Myths and the Science of Deceit, Part 9. As mentioned on the other side of our first break, our last Datum Line message ended with a review of presumption number 15 of a Treasury credit money system. Now, that's an interesting oxymoron in my view, a credit money system, proposed by Mr. Thorne and Mr. Warner in their Truth in Money book at appendix number 3, page 239, third edition for 1989. Here's what it said at point number 15, quote, a sovereign government exercising its monetary authority creates money and lends it into circulation by extending monetary credit to the private sector at an affordable interest rate. Time permitting, we'll return to the author's repetitive use, of rather authoritarian language, exemplified by the words authority, power, and sovereign. From these, we might be able to get an idea as to how they perceive the role of government in what they call a free society. And that may perhaps contrast widely from what our constitutional forefathers had intended. For now, however, let's summarize point number 15 before we continue. And this will be in contrast to biblical law and the Constitution. Uncle Sam, they say, is supposed to operate a bank. But what does the Constitution say? And that Uncle Sam is to assume the role as our benevolent lender. A lender of what? Nothing. While we are to assume the role of dependent and needy borrowers. But what does the Bible say with regards to the borrower? The borrower being servant to the lender, Proverbs 22:7. The Apostle Paul saying in the Romans 13 epistle that, owe ye no man anything but to love one another. And that this is to be at an affordable interest rate. Now, that's not going to be determined by Scripture, but by the God-men on the Potomac, pursuant to a fully inverted master-servant relationship. But what does the Constitution say about that? Let me repeat that in a different way. Where in the Constitution is Congress expressly or impliedly given the authority to open a bank, create money out of nothing, no less, and lend it to the private sector economy at interest, the rate of which is to be determined by Congress? And if such a power existed at all, why have they never done this since the Constitutional Convention of 1787, 226 years ago? Well, if you think that the populist dream of a debt-free, interest-free monetary system will somehow apply to folks like you, think again. Since you've grown up in and are accustomed to a two-tier tyrannical system, why change anything? A two-tier system is what they propose to replace the one you're complaining about. Uncle Sam will get the fiat money for nothing. In fact, we might rephrase that. Uncle Sam will continue to get the fiat money for nothing because Uncle Sam gets fiat money for nothing. Yes, there's a rate of interest that's applied, but you don't think congressmen pay that, do you? You're the one who's supposed to pay that. Okay? So Uncle Sam will get the fiat money for nothing, but not people who work for a living. And why should they? I mean, we're supposed to work for a living, aren't we? So you're the party, we're the parties, responsible to service the debt in this gigantic financial swamp. Congress, on the other hand, will retire in splendor after many years of loyal service, not to the general public, but to the global banking cartel. Meanwhile, Uncle Sam gets all of the money he wants without any interest at all. But not you. You see, it's their club. It's still their club. And you're not in it. You know, the authors have been inhaling the ether down there at Toys R Us and seem to believe that Congress are us. Well, they're not. So let's move on to point number 16 in the Truth and Money book. They're foundation stones of a Treasury credit money system. Point number 16. They say, quote, when money is repaid to the Treasury of a sovereign government exercising its monetary authority, the money is thereby removed from circulation. Again, the authors unwittingly conceal the truth by applying the same twisted vocabulary of modern economics and bank fraud to their own lawless panacea. It's as if by endless repetition we can transform black into white, and evil can be made good. Remember, the authors admitted at point number 14 that their proposed solution would be to use nothing as money. That a sovereign government creates and spends money simply by writing good checks against no funds. Remember? Well, how is a supply of non-money converted into money, which is then repaid when no money was paid out in the first place? And how could you exercise monetary authority over a supply of no money? It's a credit system, which the authors admit in the title to Appendix 3, entitled Foundation Stones of a Credit Money System. And this is point number 16 of those foundation stones. Now, the correlative of credit is debt, because when you obtain credit, it means you've gone in debt. Or when you go in debt, it's because someone has extended credit. And what is debt, which is the correlative of credit? Well, we go to State versus Deceit, Black's Law Dictionary. When you look up the word debt, we'll cite a specific case, State versus Deceit, and the definition of debt is simply a sum of money due or owing. Okay, so the correlative of credit is debt. And just like today's Federal Reserve System, the author's replacement credit system will operate on 100% credit, or, if you will, 100% debt. In other words, we're going to monetize debt. The money that we're not going to use, because it doesn't exist, is the money that we're going to use. That's the money you're going to collect, spend, save. Okay? So the system will operate on 100% debt or 100% credit. They're correlatives. With every dollar created by Uncle Sam being a 100% undelivered sum of money, never to be paid in exchange for what the private sector economy will labor to produce. Now that's 100% theft in favor of Uncle Sam. But don't worry, say the authors. Congress will never abuse this exclusive and absolute power. Now, I'd hate to accuse these dreamers of sleeping in a meth lab, but will someone please open the window and give the surviving populace a breath of fresh air? And isn't it odd how, according to the authors on page 239, this is in the Appendix 3, that they say that the monetary authority will be busy removing money from circulation, while at the same time, on page 262, the authors say, quote, the nation's monetary crisis is a shortage of money. Now, this same balancing act is performed today by the Federal Reserve System, and is done to conceal fraud and theft that's perpetrated against the American public. A system which these authors wish not to replace, but rather to replicate. The Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, for example, explained this delicate balancing act in one of their booklets, published back in the 1980s. That booklet entitled, Steering a Course Between Inflation and Unemployment. Kind of like steering a course between a rock and a hard place. Now, we could, of course, repent of socialist, centrally planned credit and go back to lawful money, gold, silver, and copper. But that option is not on the table in a world of false paradigms and Hegelian dialectics. These authors speak of money being repaid to the Treasury in consequence of that monetary authority creating money and lending it into circulation at interest pursuant to their maxim number 15. So here again is my nagging reward offer. Simply identify the substance, measured in dollars, that Mr. Thorne, Mr. Warner, and other populists, and Ben Shalom Bernanke want you to believe the new and improved Federal Reserve System will lend you simply by writing good checks on no funds, for which you'll go to jail for repaying that loan with good checks written on no funds. And I'll send you 100 pounds of it, absolutely free. Now, since the authors built upon a myth of loan payments and repayments to help conceal organized crime, this might be a good place to insert a word picture to show how a confiscatory credit system works. Picture a conveyor belt used in a coal mine where empty buckets are continually advancing toward the pile of broken up coal, and where buckets full of coal are moving in the opposite direction. Now think of the empty buckets as Federal Reserve notes and government checks written against no funds, and the pile of coal as all the tangible goods and services in the private economy. With these empty buckets, Uncle Sam extracts our production like coal is harvested from a strip mine.